Well, you will be so lonely, baby. Well, you will be lonely.
Well, good morning, boys and girls, and Heartbreak, Lonely Enough to Die is an exaggeration. It does emphasise the loss, and it marks the end of my nearly 40,000 mile journey with my gorgeous Sportster. I made these videos to show prospective buyers that, the bike isn't perfect. There are a lot of things wrong with it, things that I consider not my fault. You might even say they are faults. Just to go over them briefly, they include the fork sliders, which were terrible. They pitted, deteriorated miserably, and it happened probably in a 6 weeks period in my first winter with it. It was Christmas, they were okay, and then sort of middle of February I noticed that they were pitting terribly, and there was various signs of corrosion that were, they annoyed me. They annoy me now, actually. The mud guards where rust bubbled up underneath the paint. There was no break in the paint, but rust bubbled up in it. You'd think a modern manufacturer would paint their stuff better than that. They would, I don't know, like a red oxide primer layer or something, just to stop that nonsense. That really annoyed me. And the side panels too, they rusted around the edge. And engine cases, where they were bare metal, the lacquer wears off, and then the metal tarnishes. And substandard. If you live in Southern California, well, then it's great. It never rains, so it doesn't matter. But most of the world do not live in those conditions, and especially in Europe, we have, weather. And as I say, in 6 weeks, it was okay before, and then 6 weeks later, it wasn't. I was furious. Took it to the dealer, and because it was under guarantee then, Harley Originals guarantee. And he basically said it's just a Harley problem. A small amount of weather caused a lot amount of corrosion. And as far as I understand it, it's fairly general throughout the bike world. But perhaps more seriously, there was a leak from the front cylinder head as well, which I thought was a gasket, but I took it to a local garage and he said it's not the gasket. He'd have to take the head off to have a look. These things were not why I put it up for sale, these faults. I loved the bike and I didn't want to sell it. I had two choices, didn't I? I get the bits and repair it and then customise it to how I really wanted it, and that was always the dream. The other option was, of course, to sell it. I was very reluctant to do that. After a final ride, which I went for a couple of 100 miles just to enjoy it, just to love it for the last time. Tax was running out. And it was wonderful, and I did find myself getting very whimsical and very, emotional, I suppose. I found myself in the garage. I was just stroking the tank and saying, well, you and me, we've been through a lot together, and all of this nonsense. Again, I'm not going to decry emotional expression, but I was getting very much that, knowing it was my last ride, knowing that quite an emotional thing, quite a powerful thing as well. But it was, I enjoyed the last ride, obviously. And one of the reasons it was so poignant, it wasn't just getting rid of my Harley, it was ending the Harley journey that had been 4 years and near 40,000 miles. This was a big deal, and I didn't take that decision lightly, and I didn't want to, but the corrosion, that wasn't my fault. That was just what I considered to be poor quality finishing. But there are other things that were my fault, and they include a broken rear indicator. I broke the left-hand switch module. The mirrors were very tarnished, again, not really my fault, but they were bent as well, and the handlebars are bent. And this is because I had what they euphemistically call in the trade a slow-speed spill. I just spun up the back wheel coming out of a junction, and the back just stepped out. I didn't even feel it. 1 minute I was just accelerating away. I might have still been in first gear. And the next second I'm splat on the deck and I'm just sliding along, and I'm thinking, oh, well, it's a slide, I can live with that. But then suddenly the tyres gripped on the road and flipped me over and slammed me back down on the ground. Fortunately, nothing serious, no broken bones, no really nasty injuries. But nevertheless, it did hurt, and I still had 100 miles to get home, and it was a very, the most painful journey I've had. And I thought about this for many weeks. If I'm going to spend some money, I can really get this beautiful Sportster. I love it. Amber whiskey is the colour, and I've always loved it. And I could get it customised how I wanted, how I've always wanted. And it occurred to me that if I had a bike with electronic rider aids, that wouldn't have happened. Traction control would have caught that. And I did, rather bravely I thought, I asked about people's opinion about putting RDRS on a Sportster. The Harley Riders Club of Great Britain on their forums. I know you're opening yourself up for, hardcore ridicule if you do something like that. And I got it. I wasn't happy about that, I must say, and some of the respondents were just plain damn rude, but I had expected that. I wasn't, but there was a huge degree of ridicule, and I expected better from the Harley Riders Group of Great Britain, but nevertheless that's the way it worked. And I've got the same amount of ridicule elsewhere. And when I looked at all the respondents, and I've spoken to people in person, what do you think, this, that and the other, the negative reaction to wanting rider aids, it's not Luddite, it's not hating technology for the sake of technology, it's always a bloke being aggressive, expressing profound testosterone poisoning. A girl never says, oh, you don't want rider aids, you're stupid, you're weak, if you can't do it, you shouldn't have a bike, blah, 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 and all of this nonsense. It's always from males. I was angry, there's no question. But the long shot is, I went to the dealer and asked if they could put RDRS on my Sportster, and he said basically it's possibly something that's doable, but it would throw up so many error codes so often. Really, it's not practically feasible. The boss man, Jochen Zeitz, he's used words like emphasising the desirability of the brand and exclusivity and the premium quality, and he emphasises profit focus. He says part of the hardwire goal is to increase base profit by about 5%. Bearing in mind we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar company here, to increase bottom line profit by 5%, that is a huge thing to do. And they talk about cost cutting and efficiency and blah, 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 all that nonsense. But at the end of the day, it's all about getting the customer to pay more. In other words, putting the prices up. But in that very first year of the hardwire program, the price went up about 10% on Sportsters, even though all the costs were the same, before the pandemic anyway. In fact, as far as I remember, other models was the same price when the Sportster was still in vogue, so to speak. You could have a Sportster, a brand new iron, for about £8,500, £8,500. The same roughly in US dollars, because Harley-Davidsons are much more expensive over here. 17,000, 18,000 Australian dollars. £8,500 for the entry-level Harley, that's fine. £8,500, that's a good entry-level bike. But now the entry-level bike is £13,000, the Nightster. For me, it's putting too much emphasis on extracting money from the customer, me. And that leaves only one option: to leave Harley-Davidson. But it was a wrench, let me tell you. And as I said earlier, when I was riding it for the last time, I was getting emotional, and we've been through a lot together, and all of that, stroking the tank. It was all very poignant. But there was one moment that was worse than them all, really, and that was just started up to ride it down the drive, and of course normally when you start up your bike, you've got all your gear on, you've got your helmet on, and this time I didn't have a helmet on. Now I had my hearing aids in, and when I got off the bike, the engine was just ticking over, and I got off and I stood behind the bike, without the helmet to blur the sound, and with my hearing aids in, that beautiful sound. Oh, potato, potato, potato. It was, and at that moment, I thought, I've made a terrible mistake. I want to keep the bike, but at that moment, just to hear that sound, I realised what I'm looking at, what I'm listening to, is everything I've ever wanted from a motorbike, and I've sold it. I've made a terrible mistake. What am I doing? Oh, that was an awful moment. I just wanted to run up and grab it and get off my bike, get off my smile, I don't want, I've changed my mind. Oh dear. Well, now the garage is empty. That is a bit of a Heartbreak Hotel situation, let me tell you. That brings me to another poignant moment, I suppose, or, well, not moment, it's, I've been thinking for many weeks. If I've sold my Harley, which I have, tragic but necessary, I've got to think, what am I doing with a YouTube channel? It was all dedicated to Harley, well, my specific Harley, my Sportster. But with no Harley, you know, what am I doing? Do I bother with YouTube anymore? And I'm thinking about that now. I don't know. But the last year has been a bit of a tricky one. We've had a lot of problems, really, health problems, various other things as well, just, you know, normal life things, I suppose. But when you've got health problems as well, it really makes everything a battle. And as I've said in other videos, I've had mental health problems my whole life. Crippling bouts of depression, and even now I'm on medication, and I will remain on it too. When it helps, I shall stick with it, no question. It means I haven't done things being creative, in creativity. I'm a writer. I've never sold a single word I've written, but nevertheless I am a writer. But over the last year I've done no writing at all. It's just not been possible. The mental health situation hasn't been good enough. You need endurance, I suppose you would say. And when you've got mental health problems, you know, that tends to go right out the window. But it means I haven't done any writing, I certainly haven't done any YouTubing. I haven't really had any creative expression. It's just, if I say it's just been surviving, that's a bit melodramatic, but it means, in this particular case, I mean, the working out of ordinary life has taken all my strength and effort, and being creative, which me and Anna, we very strongly believe is a hugely important part of life, but I haven't been able to do that. And Anna has, to some degree, but it takes such a lot out of her, it's been curtailed to some degree. For me, YouTubing has been a very useful form of self-expression, of creativity, particularly the history videos and the history of the Sportster, which I am very passionate about and shall remain to be passionate about, even though I am not now a Sportster owner. I would like to continue that, to do in the next video and so on, but it is very, very hard. It takes a huge amount of effort, and you need to be on top of everything mentally to be able to do such things, so I don't know how that'll work. I was going to write a book, an actual book, on the history of riders in Bridgewater, the Harley-Davidson dealership. And I spoke to Mr. Jessup Senior and Mr. Jessup Junior, and we were going to go ahead with it, and that was good, but Mr. Jessup Senior, Phil, wasn't doing so well. He had a health problem, and it disrupted everything, obviously. And then after that, there's various other things, so Martin said, look, we're going to have to put the project on hold indefinitely, which is a great shame. I would have enjoyed that. And there's the other option for writing of a book. A nice big book I would love to do is the history of wars in London. They've got a much longer history, and although wars weren't originally a Harley-Davidson dealership, they have been selling Harleys essentially for 100 years in some capacity. So that would be a fantastic book to write. I don't know if it will come to anything. I have written to John Moore, we'll see what happens. But that would be an interesting book to write. More than interesting, it would be a fascinating book to write, and I would love to explore that. But that, of course, isn't YouTube. It's a book with pages and words and everything. It'd be great. But it definitely isn't YouTube. This past year in particular, and over the pandemic, I've been following YouTube as I haven't done before. I've never really bothered with it. I didn't really see the point of YouTube, I suppose. But with the pandemic and lockdowns and everything, so I've been following Matt Laidlaw. He does some great videos. His history of the electric glide, superb. If you want more technical stuff, there's Kevin Baxter at Pro Twin. And in the UK, there's Andy, the Missenden Flyer. Since he's got into cruisers, he's useful and interesting. And the MCN website, they do a weekly wind-on, they call it. And there's legends like Alan Millyard, and following his incredible builds, wonderful, wonderful. it's been very interesting, and I've been following different channels, looking at their perspective and investigating how they perceive motorcycling, and it's been fueling the food for thought, looking at all these other YouTubers, and I've been wondering about what I would do, or if I would do anything. And I came across Redang Revival, and he's another one who seems to have got into cruisers, and that's been quite interesting. But Redang Revival especially has been very much into promoting mental health awareness, mindfulness he calls it, and that's very much, I'm on that wavelength, if you like. They're all potential ways to carry on YouTubing, but, you know, as I say, I'm a writer, so perhaps I want to write. There's a story to tell, and I'm passionate to tell the story, whatever particular story it is. Motorbikes, motorcycles, and the history thereof, and particularly Harley-Davidson, they are a passion of mine. And I expect there's any number of stories to tell. When I did the history of the Sportster, the very first video, which I reposted, if you like, recently, changed it from private to public, that video was the general ethos of it, how it worked, how I put myself across, my understanding of the story of the Harley-Davidson Sportster, how it fits in history, particularly British history. That particular video was, I suppose you would say, the high watermark. For all its faults, it was the high watermark. But it was a massive amount of work. It took me months. And when you're battling with mental health problems, let alone physical health problems like Anna's got, and I'm a carer, so we have to manage Anna's physical health, and that takes a huge amount of effort, well, strength and endurance, particularly from Anna, bless her. But it means you haven't got, or it means I haven't got the energy left during the day for being creative. But if we can manage our respective health situations to such a degree that we can both be creative, well, the question is then, what am I going to do? I would like to do the history of the Sportster and continue it, and particularly because there are very important aspects to explore in future history. So exploring the future history of the Sportster, that would be a tremendous project. I would love to do it. Do I want to carry on with YouTube? I don't know. It is a pain. I put huge amounts of work into various videos I've done, particularly the history ones, and I enjoyed them, and they put my view across, and they told the story, which I love to do. But they didn't get diddly squat views, none of them. So if I continue with YouTube, it's got to be just to tell the story, regardless of how many people watch it, and it'll be nearly none. Anyway, that's the end. And as a wonderful old preacher said once, he said, if you've finished, why don't you stop? Well, I don't know if I'm going to continue with YouTube. This might even be my last video, we'll see. But anyway, if you've been one of my subscribers and if you've enjoyed my videos, thank you. And I hope you continue to enjoy YouTube in the future. Cheerio.